Ich bin im gelben Raum des finnischen Parlaments und neben mir sitzt Atte. Atte ist der Fraktionsvorsitzende der finnischen Grünen. Es gibt keine Doppelspitze, er macht das also alleine. Und ich werde ihn jetzt ein bisschen befragen zu Finnland und dem NATO-Beitritt. Atte, the German Green Party has a strong tradition of pacifism, especially among the older members. Having a reservist, and obviously an active reservist, as chair of the parliamentary group seems almost sacrilegious. How do you bring both into alignment, being a member of the Green Party and being a member of the Olive Green Party?
I have to start with saying that, of course, we also have a strong history with pacifism and actually peace movement, but that's not the only kind of base where the Greens stem from. But I think it's kind of natural in a way that, of course, well, the Finnish conscription system means that the majority of the male population have done conscription. I ended up doing a reserve officer training. I've been active in the reserves, but I haven't put a political color on that, and I think it's very important that the system is not politically biased. Whereas I don't think that the being a reserve officer was a specific merit for me to get to the position in the party and the parliamentary group that I did. But I think for some it was kind of like an interesting add-on that that we have a spokesperson on defense matter that can it gives a bit credibility. I think it's very important that we don't outsource defense policy to people with some experience in the military, but I think it's interesting detail that when I speak of those matters on behalf of the Greens, it cannot be kind of questioned that we're not participating or we don't know about those things. So I think in that sense, I think it's interesting, but otherwise it's quite. I think it wasn't discussed that much when I got elected, so not a big deal in a way.
So Finland has entered NATO. Has neutrality not served Finland best in the last decades, and isn't becoming a member of NATO a huge risk, especially guaranteeing that there is a 1,000-kilometer long border with Russia that is almost guaranteed to be a flashpoint?
Well, I think the logic goes that it decreases the likelihood that conflict will escalate on the border. I think the neutrality has meant a lot of things. Of course, during the Cold War, it was kind of forced neutrality biased towards Soviet Union in a way that Soviet Union was limiting the space of Finnish foreign and security policy. Now, in the 90s, when we joined the EU, that was seen as a kind of move to the Western security sphere. And then, of course, in the 90s, early 2000s, the whole role of NATO was perhaps a bit under discussion, what's the role? There was no kind of perceived threat in the traditional sense of war fighting. So then it was kind of thing that it wasn't acute to decide upon, but at the same time we were kind of strengthening our cooperation with NATO all the time. The partnership was deepening, and in that sense the Russian invasion kind of kind of released the tension in a way that it was clear that if the idea being around all the time that we can join NATO if we want, then it became a question of if we don't do it now, then do we really are we able to do it, or do we kind of lock ourselves out of that as well? So I think I've been a proponent for NATO for longer, but I think the neutrality was good enough that there was no need to make major decisions before 22. That was the kind of what the large populace and most of the politicians perceive.
Isn't it time to negotiate a solution to the end of the war in Ukraine, and e.g. a deal where Russia gets some territory and the fighting ends so that the whole tragedy of the fighting and the war is over?
The problem with that logic is I think twofold. One, of course, is that then we would acknowledge that by starting an aggressive war, you can claim territory, and that would be a precursor, something that I think we've outruled since the Second World War. That this is not a way how civilized countries operate. That we don't have wars of expansion. Having something like that in the middle of Europe would question, in a way, everything, and the risk is that it would open up the box that, okay, why would Russia stop here? Why wouldn't it try to do it somewhere else? It would be an example for kind of power politics for China as well, perhaps looking at eyeing on Taiwan, other actors maybe too. So I think that's the one major problem, that it would be kind of example of a system that we rightly tried to bury in history, and I think that would be the right thing. The second, of course, is that Ukrainians need to have a say. If the Ukrainians see that it would be better to have a deal, even if they would lose territory, then it's another question. But as long as, I think from our point of view, it's important that any kind of peace that's negotiated in some way or another need to be just, and the Ukrainians need to be the ones who have a say in that. Of course, we have our own lesson from history, from the Winter War, Continuation War, especially the Winter War, where in the end we did stay as a sovereign, independent, free country, although we had to give up a lot of territory for Russia. And in that time of the world, there was no one to, in the end, back up in a way to make sure that we would have been able to, or would have not needed to give up the territory. But I think that's one point of reflection often used in here in Finland.